Literary Theory in the Gender Lens by Sydney Packard, Shelby Williams, and Emily Prater. What is gender or feminist theory? Gender theory mainly analyzes literary representation, including all social and cultural media, as they pertain to the role of women in history. It's concerned with the ways in which literature reinforces or undermines the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women. A great example of this is the Bechdel test. For something to pass the Bechdel test, it must have at least two female characters, they must both have names, and they must talk to each other about something other than a man. In the top 500 movies from 2007 to 2012, 30.8% of speaking characters were women, 28.8% of women wore sexually revealing clothing, as opposed to 7% of men, 26.2% of women actors got partially naked while only 9.4% of men did, and 10.7% of movies featured a balanced cast where half of the characters were female. This school of theory looks at how aspects of our culture are inherently patriarchal, or male-dominated, and aims to expose misogyny in writing about women, which can take explicit and implicit forms. In every domain where patriarchy reigns, woman is other. She is marginalized, defined only by her difference from male norms and values. All of Western civilization is deeply rooted in patriarchal ideology. For example, in the biblical portrayal of Eve as the origin of sin and death in the world. Gender issues play a part in every aspect of human production and experience, including the production and experience of literature, whether we are consciously aware of these issues or not.
Another example of this is French feminist theorists. French gender theory achieved a wide readership and acquired much of its initial rigor through the work of a group of French feminist theorists that included Simone de Beauvoir, Lucy Irigaray, Helen Sixou, and Julia Kristeva. French feminist thought is based on the assumption that the Western philosophical tradition represses the experience of women in the structure of its ideas. Gender theory was first feminist theory, but has come to include the study of all gender and sexual categories and identities. The first wave occurred from the late 1700s through the early 1900s. This included writers like Mary Wollstonecraft highlight the inequalities between the sexes. Activists like Susan B. Anthony and Victoria Woodhull contribute to the women's suffrage movement, which leads to national universal suffrage in 1920 with the passing of the 19th Amendment. The second wave, which occurred from the early 1960s to the late 1970s, includes movements such as the National Organization for Women, which was formed in 1966, cement feminist political activism. Writers like Simone de Beauvoir and Elaine Showalter established the groundwork for the dissemination of feminist theories, joined with the American Civil Rights Movement. The third wave, which occurred from the early 1990s to present day, includes resisting the perceived oversimplified ideologies and a white, heterosexual, middle-class focus of second-wave feminism. Third-wave feminism borrows from contemporary gender and race theories to expand on marginalized populations' experiences. Gender studies and queer theory explore issues of sexuality, power, and marginalized populations, women as other, in literature and culture. A primary concern in gender studies and queer theory is the manner in which gender and sexuality is discussed. Political feminism emphasized the rights of women in society, women's identity, and the representation of women in media and culture. These causes converged with early literary feminist practice, which emphasized the study and inclusion of works by female authors as well as the depiction of women in male-authored texts.
Another example is the writer Judith Butler. Butler argues that gender becomes naturalized, woven so tightly into the social fabric that it seems like a necessary part of reality rather than a contingent production of history. Just how this happened is complicated. We don't invent these roles, they are invented for us. Gender identity is a performative accomplishment, she writes, compelled by social sanction and taboo. Gender is an identity instituted through a repetition of acts. When looking through the gender lens, here are some questions you can ask. How is the relationship between men and women portrayed? What are the attitudes towards women held by the male characters? Do the female characters speak differently than the male characters? How would the text be different if the protagonist was a woman? How are gender stereotypes reinforced or undermined?